Well, welcome everyone to another episode of our podcast called Compliance in Motion. We are super excited to have our guest here today as a leader in the industry and someone with certainly a lot of tenure experience in his vertical market. And we're going to let Bob tell you about his background and really what motivated him to get into the industry that he's in. He's been, I think, Bob, if I have this correctly, since 1993. You've been in the office of RDC Fine Homes and leading that industry.
Yeah, that's correct. I started around 1993, what later became formerly known as RDC Fine Homes, mostly as a consequence of not being able to find a job with anybody else.
That happens sometimes, right?
Yeah.
And the rest is what is up to us to make of it, right?
That's
and
right.
then here you are today leading the company and really forging forward. Tell us a little bit about RDC Fine Homes and explain to the audience about the types of home you build. I know I'll encourage everybody to go to your website and check these houses out. I know I'd love to live in one.
Well, thanks. RDC Fine Homes is located in Whistler and Squamish, British Columbia, which is the south coast. We are, our main office in Whistler is about 100 kilometers north of the city of Vancouver. When we started in this business, I really was just focusing on smaller projects just to put some food on the table. And as the business evolved, I became really interested in sustainable, energy efficient, durable, comfortable houses, leading through to, some significant projects that we built through the late 90s and early 2000s, where we really started to explore, what could we do to build better? Starting with a project in 1997, where we were faced with an existing older home that had a significant renovation less than 10 years before. And I recognized that there was an enormous amount of good material in a house that really no longer served its purpose. And I was able to find an individual who agreed to come in and remove the house over a long weekend, save me the cost of demolition.
Mm-hmm.
And they repurposed all that quality material right down to the insulation, appliances, windows for a new build north of Whistler and Pemberton. And so that was one of my first sort of forays into how can we do things better. And then as we progressed through the 2000s, really started to better understand the house as a system concept, how air tightness and ventilation and thermal performance of houses all work together to create that enhanced homeowner experience. That led us to start labeling, using third-party labels and testing for houses in the mid-2000s. We started off with Built Green Canada label, labeling our first house, I think in 2006. We got the highest designation there, and we have never looked back. In today's world, we label every new home and are labeling all of our significant renovations. We have moved on to a net zero label through the Canadian Home Builders Association. And that's really what we lean on today, is to demonstrate compliance to that better built concept through that third-party labeling.
Yeah, and you just mentioned the net zero, and I think for our listeners, my understanding is that you're the National Technical Research Committee chair for net zero as a vice chair. And tell us a little bit about. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, and so I'm the past chair.
Okay, past
so
chair.
I was chair of the Net Zero Council for the Canadian National Home Builders Association from, I think, 2016 to 2018. I still sit on the management committee for that council.
So for our listeners that may not be familiar with Net Zero Housing Council, tell us a little bit about what that council focuses in on and what the benefits are out of creating a focus on their mission.
So in and around 2012, there was a small group of us who were actually on the technical research committee for the Canadian National Home Builders Association. And we started to see government dipping their toe in regulating energy efficiency. And, that brought some concerns for some of us in the industry that if we allowed government to do this, then we would really lose control of what that standard might look like. And so we considered the option of identifying a voluntary compliance standard for net zero housing. Net zero simply means it would be a house that could produce as much energy as it uses. So it doesn't, create any strict requirement around how much energy it needs to produce. Beyond, it just needs to satisfy the modeled demand that is demonstrated through an energy modeling software such as Hot 2000, which is typically used in Canada. And so, out of that sort of vision, we internally approached the Home Builders Association nationally to find out if this was something that there was interest from the membership in. There was strong support, and so we created the council in and around 2013 or 2014 with an objective to try and figure out what would a label look like that would demonstrate that a house could produce as much energy as it used, um, focusing on that concept of house as a system, so everything working together to create comfortable, durable, energy efficient houses. Moving forward, more than 10 years ahead, that label is being very, very successful in creating an opportunity to understand how this is done and introduce the industry to sort of that leading edge. Of course, in
Hmm.
Canada, um, our our expectation was validated with the province of British Columbia bringing in an energy efficiency standard, which is referred to as the BC Energy Step Code. That was a voluntary compliance standard that they introduced in 2017, which was formally adopted across all municipalities in 2023. And of course, the National Building Code has followed along with a similar requirement that was released in the 2025 code. Again, a voluntary standard for the provinces to adopt over the next couple of years.
Yeah, so definitely involved in pioneering this effort and seeing it come to fruition and sustaining across Canada. So clearly an important thing as we become a more energy conscious global entity, and especially in our own backyards where we have to take proactive actions to really shore up. And I really like the idea and the concept that you have of looking at the home as a system versus assembly of parts, and just going through and starting to understand how that system works together, almost like its own ecosystem that has an impact on the environment around it. Switching gears a little bit over to a home and safety. So, talk to me a little bit about over the years, how have you seen the materials that are used in the home change to create a safer living environment? For things like, we're dealing with forest fires, we're dealing with inclement weather, we're dealing with high winds, and all of these kinds of things. And as the modernization of building materials goes through its cycles, what would your insights be as to how you've seen the industry change into making a home a safer place to live?
Yeah, some great questions there. So first, I think that energy efficiency sometimes scares people because they think that now they're going to have to approach the construction of housing in a completely different way. First and foremost, how we've built houses for the last 30 or 40 years does not have to change. Standard wood framed walls, insulation inside the cavity, that's all the same. And so there's not necessarily a really steep learning curve to understand how to build a better house through a labeling system like net zero. Certainly some of the things that we're becoming much more aware of is resilience in the face of natural disasters. Whether you're on the East Coast of the United States and you're really focusing on wind and hurricanes, whether you're in interior regions in BC and some parts of the United States, California, where wildfire is a real concern, or in other places where floods are top of mind. And so definitely the industry has shifting to better understand, particularly wind and fire, because those are two things that we can build more resilience into our housing around. Uh, for us here in the south coast of British Columbia, our biggest issue is fire. And so one of the other interesting things that I have been part of for some time now is fire resilience, and really understanding how do we build a more resilient house when it comes to fire. I think it's really important that everybody understand is that we can't create a fireproof house, but there are some very simple things that we can do in terms of material choices and how we construct the outside of our building and how we do our landscaping that can make those houses significantly more resilient in the face either of a subdivision fire, which we have seen in Southern California in a an incredibly alarming fashion, or those houses that are in the forest interface and could become really vulnerable to wildfires.
Mhm.
And we have recently completed a project in a small town called Lytton that was devastated by a wildfire in 2021, building it to a new standard that is being developed in British Columbia and across the country to create this resilient standard. And I think it's pretty logical. We're looking at materials that um, resist burning on the outside of the house. So non-combustible materials, whether it's metal or whether it's fiber cement. Trying to stay away from traditional wood siding materials or cedar shake roofs. What is particularly vulnerable in the face of fire, of course, is surfaces that have a high degree of combustibility. So, cedar shake roofs and wood decks, those are things that are really easy to replace with non combustible materials. One of the learning outcomes working hand in hand with the National Research Center that has done a lot of research on this is the risk of embers. And so we now understand that the majority of fires that occur in residential occupancies as a consequence of wildfire interface or subdivision fires is the ingress of those embers into the enclosed space, whether it's getting into attics or it's getting in through gaps in the building envelope or getting into ventilation. Those hot embers land on something that's highly flammable. And all of a
Mhm.
sudden, you go from having fire outside of your building to now I have a fire inside of my building. So, fire resilience, there's a lot that we can do in just reconsidering some of the materials and then detailing, the goal with regard to this new standard is you don't want to have a gap at the outside of your house bigger than an eighth of an inch. So pretty straightforward. And it really just comes down to attention to detail from that perspective. Whether you're using fiber cement or cedar siding, actually fiber cement can be a lower cost alternative for your cladding. Appreciating that some of our really affordable claddings like vinyl um,
Yeah.
really provide a greater risk and no resiliency. So, those are important considerations. When we look at other material choices on this road to, more resilient, more durable energy efficient housing, some things are pretty simple. When we consider house as a system, really looking for an airtight home with good
Mhm.
balanced ventilation. The building codes in the United States and in Canada have always prescribed an air barrier. Typically, in today's world, everybody would recognize this as this sheet plastic that's applied to the wood framing walls with the insulation in behind. We use, sticky caulking to glue the seams together, and then we use tape
Mhm.
to make sure that we're trying to create a bit of a balloon effect. Appreciating that if we're going to do a really airtight home, it has lots of benefits, but we also need to apply a good balanced ventilation system to
Mhm.
ensure that humidity and odors are being vented in a mechanical way, as opposed to the way it used to be, which was through all these holes in the home. And then, one of the things that comes with wildfire is smoke. And so resiliency also comes back to if we can, use a better approach to air tightness and we have a really good balanced ventilation system with filtration, when your community is enshrouded in smoke, your home becomes this oasis of clean air.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the things that people don't appreciate when we consider airtight housing is that the environment outside can actually be more contaminated than the environment inside your house.
Hmm.
And so by focusing on a house as a system approach, airtightness, ventilation, we can really improve the indoor living environment quality of homes for families.
So it's, really a very interesting topic. Obviously, for a podcast about safety and compliance, we've hit two key areas with net zero and also the specifications of houses being built today to withstand natural disaster and other kinds of elements that might threaten them. But more importantly, at the end of the day, it's all about protecting that family or those people that live inside the house. So it's definitely right in theme and on topic for our Compliance in Motion podcast. I would like to switch gears a little bit now and talk about the employees, the people out there in the field building the homes. And, when we talk about safety culture, and many of our customers coast to coast here in the States take such pride in building a strong safety culture and continuing to provide their employees with proactive safety training, whether it's full length OSHA training or safety refreshers and things like that. They're doing all the right tactical things, but many times we hear people start with it begins with leadership. Safety culture is often said to start with that leadership position. How do you personally think about and demonstrate and reinforce the safety first mindset amongst your team at RDC Fine Homes?
Yeah, I think, the easiest way to start this is going back to my experience working as a carpenter on residential construction sites in the late 80s and early 90s. Particularly on the residential side, the focus was on bravado, machismo. Um, the first 5 years of my career, there wasn't any safety focus. There was no safety equipment. One of my most memorable experiences was in late November, framing a roof on a house overlooking a cliff, being somewhat 60 feet over the above the ground, on main walls all covered in ice, trying to break apart pre-assembled rafters that were all frozen together. And you know the uh, the instruction that we got as we started work in the morning is everybody better be careful because I don't want anybody getting killed on my site today. Um,
And that
and
was it. Yeah.
and that was it. And I mean, we used to walk top plates. Uh, our very little focus on personal protection equipment. And I realized as I started my own business that this was creating enormous risk. And so, from the earliest days of managing sites, we brought in fall protection, and we started to do a better job on these things. And one of the memorable moments in my career was I was at a safety presentation through the Canadian Home Builders Association in BC, where we had an introduction to the Certificate of Recognition program that had just been introduced to the province through the road builders, and a very impassioned speech around site safety and the personal responsibility that we had as owners to ensure that everybody went home in the same condition that they arrived in. And I really decided to double down on safety. And so we became the first small residential builder in British Columbia to complete the Certificate of Recognition program. We became core certified in the mid to late 2000s. And through that journey, started to really understand that safety culture it wasn't top down, it was bottom up. And if we didn't create a culture where people believed in safety, we could beat people over the head around you have to do these things as much as we could. But we had to get buy in from our team. And so by following the core compliance standards, we are able to start to, introduce this in a more granular way to the team and really try to make the individuals on site responsible for this as opposed to
Yeah.
somebody like me telling them you have to do this because that's the rule. And we see, across the industry that trying to force people to do things is less successful as
Yes,
opposed to engaging them in this in a meaningful way to make them understand that it is your responsibility to ensure that you and all your teammates go home in the same condition that you arrived. And so over the years, we've brought safety into our everyday activities. The guys start their day with a safety huddle that touches on safe work practices for today and what are the risks? What are the risks today? Because the risk today could be different than the risk yesterday. We are still core certified. Uh, we do safety talks once a month. We bring everybody back to our main office, feed them all breakfast. And one of the ways that we're really feeding a safety culture from the bottom up is we ask our individual carpenters and site superintendents to do the toolbox talks. So we rely on them. You bring a topic to us that you think is relevant,
excellent.
and then
Yeah,
and then you get to present this. And so it's not me or construction manager telling them you have to do these things. Our staff see their colleagues presenting things that are important to them. I mean,
yeah,
we actually had a toolbox talk yesterday, and one of our site superintendents realized that we weren't doing a very good job on protecting rebar. We're doing a project where we're pouring concrete. And so he came onto the site and realized that we weren't doing a very good job on this. And so he said, we need to do a toolbox talk on rebar safety. We'd actually never done one. And we had a fantastic discussion on what we can do better to protect people, not only from impalement. I mean, the
mhm,
statistics around injury from rebar is unimaginable, but very interesting in my career when I was
yeah.
working as a young carpenter. Actually exposed my entire shin bone um, to a sharp piece of rebar, and so those are ways that you can really drive safety from the bottom up.
I want to call out something that you said, and as you were walking through your voiceover there, to make sure that our listeners really keyed in on this, because so many times over and over we hear that safety culture starts at the top with leadership. But one of the things that you pointed out was that it is also a grassroots effort. So if you're thinking about your safety culture or your process or who's involved and who has buy in, it really has to be across the organization. And one of the things that was just pointed out by Bob that I think is so interesting that I don't hear enough of is that you empowered supervisors and held them accountable to bring things to the front in a way that they would actually present the safety refreshers and the toolbox talks and really have that buy in with their team. And because they're the ones that are on the ground and they're seeing this firsthand, what needs to change and what needs to be done to create a safer work environment, of course, they are the best resource to be fully immersed in the topic. And once you start sharing what the topic is about with others and educating others, you really start to internalize it at a different level. So it's important to have that leadership set the tone for empowerment and through demonstrated actionable actions, let people take the lead on this, but then make sure that, you've got that buy-in because so many times we'll hear stories of, like people, it's a once and done mentality. Yeah, I did that last year. I don't need a refresher. Or it's, I've been doing this forever. I'm going to kind of daydream for a little bit. But as soon as you feel like you're pushing that ownership into the people that are on the job site, it changes the dynamic. But you still have to have leadership that understands it needs to be done and give people the time to get it done. So it talks a little bit about process here. Um, Tell us how you go about sustaining your process over time. Do you use current technology to help you do that? Do you have a system of checks and balances that's paper based, or is it all automated? It's a challenge for a lot of people to not only implement different uh, tactical plans that support their overall safety culture, but once they get them up and running, sustaining them over time. Tell us a little bit about how you accomplish that task.
So specific to safety, So one, the guys have a morning huddle on every site. They follow a prescribed checklist of talking points for safety. We have signage on site that identifies all these things. There's a form that gets filled out every morning. We have an online project management portal called Builder Trend, and it
Hmm.
has a daily log. So that physically filled out form that identifies the safety requirements for the day. They take a photograph. It's logged onto Builder Trend, so everybody can see that that was done. We use a secondary software system called DATS, which is specific
Hmm.
to safety compliance. We use this for our audit at the end of the year. And so actions are completed within that software. There's actions that need to happen on a regular rotating basis. And of course, if there is an incident on site, everything gets logged through the DATS system. We have a joint occupational and health and safety committee that meets once a month. Uh, we have senior management that sits on that committee, as well as apprentices, Red Seal carpenters, and site superintendents. And we rotate people through that committee every
Hmm.
few years. So all of our staff get an opportunity to sit on that committee itself. Of course, we are a core certified organization. So we have to do an internal audit for 3 years. And then on the fourth year, we have to go and do an external audit. And so those audits really then highlight what are we doing well and what do we need to improve, recognizing that if we fail, if we fail the audit, we lose our core status.
Right.
And so, everybody is very, very focused on making sure that we do our due diligence, we fill in the paperwork that we need to, we track what we're doing. And we actually are just starting our core audit for this year. It's an external one this year that starts next week. Is that
Gotcha.
am I answering the question?
Yeah, absolutely. And then a follow on to that would be talk to me a little bit about like safety incentive programs. I mean, some people will say, we don't have a safety incentive program because, we're not allowed to by certain union standards or different aspects of their workers' comp programs. Others will pay, no, we absolutely believe in a safety incentive program. And then we hear people, hey, the incentive is you're not getting hurt. You're, that's the end game. What are your thoughts on establishing a safety incentive program around reinforcing that behavior of staying safe on the job and applying things that you've learned in your training?
I mean, yeah, this has been a topic of discussion over the years, and you see job sites that have so many days without an injury, and we were taught many many years ago that it can be a slippery slope to try and either reward safety stats, days without a workplace injury, because the risk is that people just simply stop reporting. And one of the most important things for us is lessons learned from near misses. And so, we encourage everyone not only to report when you injured yourself, but we also want to know about those near misses so we can use them as education opportunities for the team, whether it creates a toolbox talk. And there's many situations where we've had a near miss and it's created a topic for a safety toolbox talk. I think that, because we're really focusing on a bottom up approach to safety, where it is everybody's responsibility to make sure their coworkers, the trades are on site, everybody goes home in the same condition that they are, that we really are promoting the reward in this is your safety. Um, we have lots of rewards things for lots of things, but we don't reward individual sites for not having an accident. But what we do is we include everyone in a discussion on how we're doing. And there is an overall global financial reward to the company because if the company does well, everybody does well, and if we have a poor safety record, it affects what we have to pay for workman's compensation insurance. And so we do let everybody know how we're doing. Are our costs going up or are our costs going down? And that all, the guys really seem to resonate with, we did a great job. We're saving the company money. It gives them more resources to provide better education for us, give us more raises, all kinds of extra benefits. So,
Yep.
we're trying to engage everybody that this is important for you, as opposed to trying to create some uh, external reward system on this.
Yeah, and that's actually the page that I sit on. I'm directly aligned with how you just voiced that over. There are a lot of people that will have an incentive program to complete certain courses and get to the next level and things like that, but they do have to be constructed in a way so that it doesn't encourage the behavior that would be detrimental to the organization. And then the second thing about what you said as a key takeaway for our listeners is if you're not doing this already, boy, it should be your best practice because it is one that we definitely recognize. And Bob just talked about it in relationship to his company. And that is to let people know about the impact of an injury, or not just to the person and the personal and their family and things like that. But now we're talking about impacting the business and the profitability of the business. And without higher profits, we don't have the money to invest in our people and to make this a better place for everyone to work. And so it should be a cultural thing that it's just about the bigger picture, and you as an individual are part of that bigger picture. As we wrap up the podcast today, Bob, I would like you to think in terms of if you could share like two or three points of advice for our listeners today that you've really come to embrace throughout your career when it comes to employee safety and that safety culture. What tips or takeaways would you want them to have from your backlog of experiences, whether it's something to go implement or just something to start thinking about tomorrow?
So I think one of the most important things for business owners to consider, whether you're a general contractor like us offering carpentry services, or you're a roofer, or any of the other trades, is there's a perception that safety is expensive and I'll do it if I have to. But uh, if nobody's paying attention, I can offer a better price, or I'll make more money if I can skip certain things. And while the industrial commercial side of construction is really good generally at enforcing good safety standards, the residential side can be terrible. And while safety absolutely has a cost on one hand, when your workers feel safe, they will be more productive. And so, one, I would disagree that safety costs more money. And then, the other thing that's really worked well for us is we have had people come to us looking like really high quality A players have come looking for a job at RDC because they have identified that we are a safe place to work. And so we have better retention, and we can
Mhm.
resist other companies coming to try and, uh, steal our employees with slightly higher wages, because our staff understand that while they may not have that short-term opportunity to get 2, 3, $4 more an hour, when they come to work at RDC Fine Homes, they work in a safe workplace. And so, I strongly encourage employers to reconsider if they're not operating at high level with regards to site safety, reconsidering why you're not doing that, particularly in the residential industry. Um, Safety is not as challenging as you might think if you engage your team. Uh, One of the things that is important when we talk about leadership is to make sure your leaders demonstrate the best practice around safety. So for, my example, it doesn't matter whether I walk onto a site that's in framing, or whether I'm walking onto a site where they're doing carpet, I will always show up with all my PPE, my personal protection equipment. I'll have my
Yep.
Visi vest, my boots, and my hard hat on. And we vigorously enforce that all our leaders always show up uh, perfectly outfitted in everything that is expected, to the point where, I've gone to do a site visit and realized I forgot my boots. And so I'll end up standing on the driveway having a discussion from afar. But it's really important, right? Because
Yeah.
if your leaders don't live your safety culture, everybody will assume that they don't have to either.
Right. Right. Excellent insights and tips. Well, as we're wrapping up our podcast today, I want to thank Bob personally for sharing his insight and experiences. This was an excellent podcast today. We covered a lot of ground, but our listeners are sure to walk away with key tips and insights, whether they're things to think about or things to execute. Bob certainly has shared a lot of great information today with us. And for those of you who live in his market, go check out RDC Fine Homes website, because if you're in the market for looking for a new home, you're going to want to definitely take a look at some of these. Bob, thanks again so much for your participation. Best of luck to you as you move into the end of the calendar year here, and we'll look forward to connecting in the future.
Thanks very much, Tony. Really enjoyed talking with you today.